Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed we do. We are awaiting tonight the long-anticipated Kamala Harris interview. She amazingly hasn't given one since Biden dropped down, which now feels like 83 years ago. So that's happening alongside her vice presidential pick, Tim Walz. So we will preview that. We also have finally, actually, a significant amount of polling coming out post-DNC, especially some Fox News swing state polls that are very interesting, and also some voter registration data that is worth digging into, so we'll get into that. We're also taking a look at a Wall Street Journal poll of how Americans are feeling about the American dream. Seems kind of important, so we're gonna dig into that. We've got some Trump indictment news, a superseding indictment issued in the election interference case. We're also going to take a look at Trump's economic plans, since we've been focused a little bit on what Kamala Harris is up to. We'll contrast what Trump's plans are as best you can decipher. Not that you ever really know what that man is going to do, but we should take him at his word that these are the things that he plans to implement if he is once again elected president of the United States. We also have some news coming out of Israel. There's kind of, sort of, maybe a temporary partial ceasefire in order to vaccinate some Palestinians for polio. There is now a polio outbreak in the Gaza Strip, so we'll take a look at that. And I am doing a monologue today on whether or not the Bernie to Trump pipeline is real. This, of course, Saagar, being relevant in the wake of the RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard Trump endorsements.
There's something going on there. We can talk about it. I'm actually excited to listen.
I apologize in advance.
Yeah.
The monologue is way too long.
Yeah.
But
There has been a
when
split.
I scratched the surface, there was too much I wanted to say.
Well, there's been a fun split, and you know, it's almost like a study of religion or something, and to see like the fractionalization of all of it. So anyway, I'm interested and I'm excited to talk about it. Thank you to all of our premium subscribers, breakingpoints.com, if you want to go ahead and sign up and help us out here. But why don't we begin with Kamala, the big interview. It is today.
Tonight at what, 9 p.m.?
It's tonight at 9 p.m. I unfortunately will be on a plane, but Krystal will have it covered.
Dana Bash, also known maybe as BB Bash because of her pro-Israel commentary. Anyway, that'll be potentially relevant. Let's go ahead and put the announcement up on the screen. So Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going to sit with CNN's Dana Bash this evening, 9 p.m. Eastern. It says it occurs as the candidates embark on a bus tour through the battleground state of Georgia. It marks the first time Harris has sat with a journalist for an in-depth, on-the-record conversation since President Joe Biden dropped his bid for a second term and endorsed her on July 21. A lot of pressure on her, Saagar, obviously, to agree to do an interview. Seems like kind of the basics of what you would expect from a candidate for president in a democracy. So good that this is finally happening. A lot made of the fact that she's going to have Tim Walz alongside of her. You know, one of the risks of waiting so long and doing so few, at this point zero, interviews is that it makes each one so much more significant.
Yes, 100%.
You know, if you do a lot of interviews, also it makes the media happier, so they're more likely to go a little bit easier on you. When you wait so long, you know, on the one hand, it means you don't have an opportunity to make a mistake. She's timed this very strategically to be before the Labor Day weekend, holiday weekend. So if she does stumble, as is possible and as we've seen in previous interviews, it's very likely, you know, after the long holiday weekend and we come back next week on Tuesday, that a lot of that will be forgotten. So it's strategically timed, et cetera, but there's no doubt that she has built a lot of anticipation around this interview simply because of the scarcity of Kamala Harris unscripted moments.
That's why the risk is there. And so that's why there's a criticism that she's doing it with Tim Walz. It's actually apparently, I didn't know this, apparently it is a tradition that you're supposed to do a sit-down interview. It's with your running mate. It's just that you usually do it like the day after you name your running mate. You don't usually wait for, you know, several weeks or any of that. It's an extraordinary time. I think only 68 days as of today until the election. I know, which is nuts whenever you put it that way.
Voting starts in some states in like 9 days.
Yeah, 9 days. You have early voting, which is completely crazy. But okay, let's come back and think about the interview. The real risk here is that, and one of the major benefits for Trump, I think we can always say, was the spray and pray strategy, where he's always in the public eye at all times. So I remember when I covered him at the White House, he would say something crazy, and then we would do an interview and it would get cleared up, or we would do something else, and everyone would move on within 24 hours, sometimes even less than that. And that's the thing, the risk is if you do one bad one and then you are, you know, entrenched, where all the evidence we have so far from her campaign, it's very risk averse.
Yeah,
so they're looking back at all their past interviews. We're going to show everybody some highlights and some things that they want to do. But given her bad experience now so far, it may actually retrench her. And then all we will have as media and others is this single interview where it doesn't go that well. I also do think there's like a real softball element. I mean, you talked here about Dana Bash. Dana Bash is an incredibly biased figure, from her Israel commentary to her like masculinity commentary, which we were going to talk about last time in our show and eventually will at some point. But like, this is not, some so-called straight up news anchor. Fine if it's one of a lot, but it's a little different whenever it's somebody who is not on the record praising Tim Walz immediately and Doug Emhoff immediately after the speech, and then you turn to the first interview. It's funny, our friend Glenn Greenwald, before the interview was announced, he's like, I bet she goes to somebody like Dana Bash. And he's as good as, he's even more cynical than me, which takes a lot of work. But what he's accurately pointing out is that you go to the safe route. And I think that's one of the reasons that they are doing so. And I don't think that's a good thing. I really don't.
I mean, I think Dana Bash will feel enough pressure just given the high profile nature of the event. She's going to ask some things that are meant to challenge.
Yes.
And, in terms of Kamala and how she'll perform, I genuinely don't know what to expect because frankly, after she did that Lester Holt interview that, on the border that was crash and burn, she basically didn't do any more interviews for a long time. And so that's my last impression of how she performs in these settings. And obviously it was very, very poor. But that was also probably her most catastrophic interview incident. So I'm wondering if my expectations for her are too low because I'm actually biased in terms of thinking like that's how her standard performance is. And in general, obviously when she was running for president, she gave a lot of interviews and most of them were not all that noteworthy. She was able to get through it well enough. So yeah, the expectations are high. Perhaps the Lester Holt interview being the last thing in people's minds have set the expectations very low for her, which means if she just kind of gets through it with no major stumbles, then it will be relatively inconsequential. But obviously, because she's waited so long, she's built up that risk. The very legitimate, I think, knock on Kamala Harris that she and her team themselves obviously must agree with, given how cautious they've been about putting her into unscripted settings, is that she's not good in interviews and she's not good in debates.
Yep.
But again, thinking back to how she did against Mike Pence, for example, she did fine. And she had some moments that, was perfectly serviceable performance. And she had some moments that they felt good about. Now, those moments are the sort of thing that the media celebrate. They're very girl boss type of moments. And, that she was proud of and sort of reminiscent of the "that little girl was me" shot that she landed on Joe Biden, et cetera, et cetera. But CNN was recently reliving some of what they considered to be her strongest debate moments against Mike Pence. Let's go ahead and take a listen to a little bit of that.
But Susan, this is important.
Susan,
I want to add, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
I'm
speaking.
Yeah, you can have 15 more seconds, and then we'll give the Vice President a chance to.
Joe Biden has been very clear. He will not raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000 a year.
He said he's going to repeal the Trump tax cuts.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
Well,
I'm speaking.
Be important if you said the truth. Is he only going to repeal part of the Trump tax cuts?
If you don't mind letting me finish, we can then have a conversation, okay?
Please.
Okay. Let's talk about the fact. Yeah, I'm about to.
I mean, it was iconic. All I
will say is that it was not just a lie.
Wait a minute. You're watching it right now. That is just what happened right there. So women oftentimes in the workplace try to be able to get their voices heard, and then men try to speak over them. Did you ever notice that?
Abby, has that ever happened?
Well, Lauren, let me let you finish your point.
Exactly.
Before both of these men attempted to intervene here.
He has the floor. Is that right?
No, I don't.
Lauren has
Thank you, Abby. That's lovely. Thank you. No, look, I mean, they are counting on the debates being a kind of catharsis for Democrats.
bullet in my skull over there.
Now I remember why people watch our show.
Yeah.
Ever you
There's
need a
couple
reminder,
reasons.
just turn on cable news.
You're
for a
right.
little
I
bit.
mean, they erected a literal "I'm speaking" mural here in Washington D.C. I'm not sure if you remember that.
I don't.
But what CNN wants to do, what CNN was highlighting is that's what they want. That's part of the reason what they want out of the debate. It's part of the reason why Kamala wanted unmuted mics. By the way, we still have yet to get a actual answer on the unmuted microphones.
Oh, I thought they decided they were going to stick with the original rules.
That's what Trump said. But then the Kamala campaign came out and was like, no, we still haven't agreed on that.
Oh.
So, but he's like, I will be at the debate. Whatever. Okay, I don't even particularly care at this point. Someone let me know. Just let me know, though, what the actual rules are. The point being that, yeah, look, she does fine. I mean, personally, you know, that doesn't do it for me, but I'm not the only person who votes in this country. There are a lot of people apparently who like it. What you want to see from a Kamala Harris is just a normal, like you want a baseline. But the problem is, and this is where it gets to the risk, is that she has had many moments where she significantly underperforms the politician baseline. And that is the interesting thing here, where you have somebody who right now, you know, not only is running on vibes, but purely on script. And when you're so defensive, and what we also know about her is I think she's a deeply insecure individual from behind the scenes. We know this from her interviews, from the high staff turnover, from all of the leaks about the people, about how she explodes behind the scenes whenever she feels like she's not prepared. This is a very typical politician thing, to blame your staff when an interview goes badly, even though it's like, hey, you're the one on the camera, lady. Like, you know, you're the one who allegedly is trying to get elected. So I could see it going both ways. I do think it's going to be better for her that Tim Walz is there with her, because frankly, he's just a far more compelling figure. He's more affable. He can clean some things up if he needs to. And in general, my general rule is like, if you really can't sit for 30, 45 minutes and not make an idiot of yourself, you don't belong in this business, period. Like, you should never have made it this far. So if she does fail, I mean, that just is real evidence about her genuine weakness as a candidate off the cuff, where, look, you can try and hide as candidate, but as president, it is actually quite literally impossible. The demands of the job actually make it impossible. Even Biden, as we saw, they tried their absolute best. We had plenty of evidence before we ever set foot on that debate stage that he was a long gone man, right? And so there is a proven aspect to this job where I think some Americans hopefully will be watching, and she has set the stakes now so high, given that she's waited over a month to even have an interview. Also, I do think it's a little BS to time it right before Labor Day weekend, when people like me are getting on a plane and many others are probably jetting off or getting in the car and going somewhere on vacation. So that's, you know, that's another sign of weakness that we see there.
Yeah, I do think in terms of her public appearances, it seems to me Kamala Harris has never had more confidence than she does right now.
That's absolutely true.
She has a swagger and a command that she is kind of like, you know, undefinable X factor type characteristics that we didn't really see in 2020. But just to relive, you know, what was perhaps her worst interview moment, and which is really perplexing on a variety of levels, because the question was a totally predictable question that she received and is just completely flummoxed by. This is the now infamous Lester Holt border interview with Vice President Kamala Harris. Let's take a listen.
There's one other topic I wanted to talk to you about, but let me just quickly put a button.
Okay.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
I'm here in Guatemala today. At some point, you know, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I mean, I don't understand the point that you're making. I'm not discounting the importance of the border.
Well, I mentioned it because I know Republicans have certainly come at you on this, but Democratic Congressman Cuellar has a border district, has said to you and the president, come. You need to see this.
Listen, I care about what's happening at the border. I'm in Guatemala because my focus is dealing with the root causes of migration. There may be some who think that that is not important, but it is my firm belief that if we care about what's happening at the border, we better care about the root causes and address them. And so that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very infamous moment, right? For good reason. We inarticulate, lack of command of the facts, a little bit of arrogance,
too.
unprepared.
It's like, how did you not anticipate?
I mean, these are like the absolute basics, and that's part of why she was the most unpopular vice president in modern history. You know, up until she basically got anointed here. And there's no question in my mind, I don't think she would win an open primary if it were actually open back in the day, before, you know, in a real process, not not necessarily being anointed. And that is why I think it's a risky proposition for her and for the Democrats. And you see it too, where all of the flip-flopping on all of these issues, there's almost been so many that you'd have to do an interview solely focused on that, as opposed to, you'd be like,
let's
okay.
talk about Medicare for all. All right, let's talk about fracking.
Medicare for all. Then let's do fracking. Then let's do the border wall, which
Right.
you're pro-border. Now let's go about what about crime?
Let's talk about criminal justice.
Yeah, I could probably spend 2 hours with that woman just being like this, and this. And so do I have confidence that Dana Bash is going to do all of that? No. And that's part of the issue, and part of why she needs to do more interviews, because the other danger is that we see her recreate her infamous debate moment with Tulsi Gabbard, where she has no idea what to do when called out on her hypocrisy. So with Dana Bash, she'll probably hit her on I'm guessing fracking, just because that's one where we've seen them stumble in the past, and probably the border too. That's the most stark one that they have.
She'll ask her some at least challenging questions.
I really hope so.
No, I would be surprised if she didn't, because it just, as I said, they've kind of pissed off the press.
Yeah.
And so they've made it much more likely that the questioning will be a bit more hostile, even from someone like Dana Bash. But to your point, Saagar, and this is part of why I think there will be some at least somewhat challenging questions. You had John Berman speaking to a Kamala Harris spokesperson, and on the flip-flopping question was really pressing him on fracking. Let's take a listen to how that exchange went.
The vice president has changed her position on fracking in Pennsylvania. Do you know why she's changed her position?
Listen, she's been very clear here. She's proud of the work that she's done as a part of this administration, making sure that American energy production is at an all-time high. We want to continue that progress into her first term in office here. And again, I think whether it's energy policy, economic policy writ large, that you have a fighter in Kamala Harris who is actually keeping these interests of the American people front and center, coming together to bring people together in search of solutions that actually improve people's quality of life, improve our economy, improve energy production.
But on fracking, was there something that changed her mind, specifically during the 4 years of the Biden presidency?
No, listen, again, the vice president is very proud of the Biden-Harris administration's record on energy production and the economy writ large. She wants to continue to build upon the progress that we've made here. That goes for energy production and it goes for the economy across the board, right?
So, he's pressed multiple times there. And this, one of the things that will be interesting is usually when Kamala is prepared, she does well.
Yeah.
When she, that first debate in 2020 in the Democratic primary, that little girl was me moment has kind of curdled over time. But it hit in the moment.
That's
and
true.
she was good, not just then, but she was on it in that debate. She was very good because a lot of the fire wasn't trained on her. So she could just insert herself when she felt comfortable. She could sort of occupy that role as the prosecutor. She had clearly prepared herself very well for that. And she wasn't caught off guard. For whatever reason, the Lester Holt interview, she was not prepared for that question. There's no one to blame but herself for that. And a lot of the potentially difficult line of questioning here is also very anticipatable. The flip-flop questions are really obvious. So if you can't answer that, if you don't have a plan for answering that, you can't execute in the moment, it really would be sort of pathetic.
It would be stunning.
Frankly, it would be fairly pathetic. One last point I want to make about this, and then I'll get your final thoughts, and then we can move on to the latest with regard to the polls. But part of why, and I think this is unfortunate, but part of why I don't think that most voters really care that much about how many interviews she does, et cetera, is because of the fact the media is so discredited. How much punch does it really pack when Republicans are on the one hand all of this is fake news media and Dana Bash is terrible, et cetera, but also we really want her to sit down for an interview with the fake news media. And for a long time, liberals have been the last bastion of media trust.
Yes.
And that continues to be the case at certainly much higher levels than Republicans. But that has eroded also. There was a lot of, I don't know if you guys followed this or were in these circles, but there was a lot of liberal criticism and continues to be a lot of liberal criticism of the New York Times and the Washington Post first over what they saw as unfair coverage of Joe Biden's age. They sort of dropped that one. But now, and some of these are really legitimate, like some of the fact checks that Washington Post and New York Times have been doing have been relatively absurd. And so there's a media critique conversation that's happening in the liberal side of the equation too that I really have never seen before. And of course, independents are also really disaffected and distrustful. Americans in general, just like across the board, are mistrusting of the media. And so, I think that's part of why she feels like she's going to check this box because she's under some pressure to do it. But other than that, I don't think she feels particularly compelled or pressured to do these interviews. And again, that's an unfortunate thing. That's a sign of the degradation, both of our media and of like small d democracy in the country. But I saw one journalist describe her as like the first post-media presidential candidate. And I think in a sense that is correct. She just doesn't feel much pressure and isn't going to feel much pressure to have to subject herself to truly rigorous, difficult interviews. And that's just kind of the new reality in American politics until we, the people, force a different reality from this just like skating by and not really having to take a lot of tough questions.
You're exactly right. So I looked at the data very recently. Trust in the media amongst Democrats, partisan Democrats, is roughly 73%, but it's much higher for institutions like MSNBC and others where they feel like some kinship. And in general, what you're seeing, especially with younger generations, is that, cutting the cord, obviously I support that and people should, and they should support the show, but, has really led to a stratification of news consumption. The only reason that Trump is not the first post-media candidate is because he's so old, he still worships a lot of mainstream media brands like the New York Times and Time Magazine. I mean, in his head, he still thinks Time Magazine is relevant. I'm like, again, I was born in 1992. For me, Time is like Time for kids. I'm like, it's like trash, like something you throw in the trash. Do I know that it once upon a time was relevant? Yeah, that's like telling me about somebody being on the cover of Life magazine in World War II. I collect them. Yeah, it doesn't mean I care what that. Does it even exist anymore? I literally couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
And that's a generational thing. So for Kamala and for a lot of her advisors, they are in. The other thing is too is that the Democrats and Obama was the chief of this. Obama had a deep disdain for the media. People don't realize this because he privately would talk with his advisors, and he was like, why do I have to give these people anything? They're going to basically support me no matter what. They hate the Republicans. And why should I subject myself to fake scrutiny? So he actually pioneered, the modern influence presidency. Remember his videos with BuzzFeed, or he was the first person to do a Vox interview. He actually made history in his first question as president of the United States was not to the New York Times or the Associated Press. It was to the Huffington Post. And that was a very clear signal. He was like, hey, the rest of you, I got options now.
Yeah.
And that was 2008 or 2009,
yeah,
the day that happened. Think about how long it's been since that. So Kamala, look at the DNC. You had the Creator Lounge and all of that. That is a proto of what is to come. That's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah.
But you're right in terms of, partisan distrust of media is at a point right now where, and the Quentin Tarantino was the perfect thing where he's like, why should you do an interview? He's like, I'm going to vote for you no matter what you say. There's a lot of people who actually think that, and they think that about Trump as well.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trump's has some elements of this strategy too. He is really leaning into, and you see this with the Tulsi and the RFK Jr. picks, he is really leaning into these sort of like, online anti-establishment podcast realm. He's doing an interview with Lex Friedman, apparently coming up as an example of that, and betting that that's like a significant enough force now in American politics to make a difference from him. So interesting experiment that he's running there. But yeah, I mean, the previous norms of sitting for these interviews and feeling a responsibility to do them, and like the main networks, getting these interviews regularly, it's basically over. And so this pressure resulting in her sitting down and doing this interview with Dana Bash is kind of a last gasp of the old way of doing things, for better and mostly for worse.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.